Monstrous Regiment by Terry Pratchett. Book review. So this is the second book I've read in the Discworld series. The first one was Going Postal, and I enjoyed that one so much I decided to pick up another one. In Japan, there are these kind of book exchanges for English books where, there's a shelf of books, you can put down a book and then take one, and there are usually a lot of Discworld books in these book exchanges. So I just grabbed one of these. Now I mentioned this in my review of Going Postal, but a friend of mine told me that some of the Discworld series are better than others. I'm assuming Monstrous Regiment is one of the better books because it was great. It was funny, but it wasn't just funny. There was actually a lot of relevant satire here. Satire that's relevant to today's world. I may have been influenced by the critics on the back cover of the book. I'm not sure. I know you're always supposed to take those things with a grain of salt, but there was a lot of high praise on the inside jacket of this book, the book jacket. To quote a couple of them, the Daily Express said, "An extended morality tale on the subjects of pacifism, intolerance, and gender, gathered together into a military adventure. It is how John Lennon would write a sharp novel if Bernard Cromwell left him to do it. A great piece of writing akin to Jonathan Swift." And then from the Times, "A fantasist who loves naif humor and silly names, and yet whose absurd world is, at heart, a serious portrait of the jingoistic fears that keep us at each other's throats." After having read the book, I think I'd more or less agree with both of those. The book touches on a lot of themes. Talks about gender discrimination, religious fundamentalism, and patriotism being the kind of big three. Fantasy is obviously a great medium to do satire in, although at times it has its limits. And Pratchett seems to be stretching up against the limits sometimes. The story he wants to tell here is loosely modeled on the Napoleonic Wars. But the fantasy setting of the Discworld books is more of a medieval fantasy setting, kind of more of the swords and sandals. It's not quite the guns and rifles story he wants to tell. He gets around this a little bit by substituting the crossbow and the catapult for the guns and the cannons. But you can feel like he's stretching things a little bit. Also, I guess there's a question of how relevant an anti-war story modeled on the Napoleonic Wars is to today's world. And yet, certain passages seem to me to be dead on. For instance, this passage, as the main character Polly reflects on the continual state of war. Quote, "There was always a war. Usually it was a border dispute, the national equivalent of complaining that the neighbor was letting his hedge grow too long. Sometimes it was bigger. Borogravia is a fictional country. Borogravia was a peace-loving country in the midst of treacherous, devious, warlike enemies. They had to be treacherous, devious, and warlike. Otherwise, we wouldn't be fighting with them, eh? There was always a war." End quote. Or another section, this is a conversation among the soldiers. The quote I'm starting with here is jumping into the conversation a little bit. It's ongoing at this point, but, quote, "And what you've got there, my friend, is patriotism. My country, right or wrong." "You should love your country," said Shufti. "Okay, what part?" the voice of Tonker demanded from the far corner of the tent. The morning sunlight on the mountains, the horrible food, the damn mad abominations, all of my country except whatever bit Strappy is standing on? But we're at war. Yes, that's where they've got you, sighed Polly. Well, I'm not buying into it. It's all trickery. They keep you down, and when they piss off some other country, you have to fight for them. It's only your country when they want you to get killed, said Tonker. In quotes. A lot of these conversations from the book is very reminiscent to me of the conversations that the soldiers were having on All Quiet on the Western Front, which I've also recently read. In fact, it seems so reminiscent of some of those conversations, it's almost kind of borderline plagiarized, but I doubt Remarque, the author of All Quiet on the Western Front, would mind too much.